Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with Dr. Carlin Barnes and Dr. Marketa Wills, two Harvard-trained psychiatrists who authored the book Understanding Mental Illness, a comprehensive guide to mental health disorders for family and friends. In the book, they offer practical guidance to help people understand and deal with mental health issues. Today, we're going to talk about how to determine if the mother in your life is suffering with mental illness and practical ways you can help. We're also going to discuss the stigma behind mental illness and the most common types there are. Hi, Dr. Barnes and Dr. Wills. Welcome.
Hi, how are you, Caroline?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So let's start by getting to know you both. Can you each share a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do specifically?
Sure. So I'll jump right in. Dr. Wills, if you don't mind.
Sounds great.
Perfect. So I am Dr. Carlin Barnes. I am a double board certified psychiatrist. I have a specialty in child and adolescent psychiatry, and I'm a general adult psychiatrist as well. I am from northern New Jersey, Hillside, New Jersey, which is where I was born and raised. But I've settled and landed in Houston, Texas, and I have been here for about, the last 20 years now. I have an adult son I'm a proud mom. He just graduated from Duke University.
Nice.
And yeah, ACC family. I graduated from University of Virginia, so we have a great time around basketball season.
Oh, I can imagine.
With the pandemic this year, I haven't been keeping up with it. I just know Coach K is kind of really, adamant about keeping everybody safe, which is a great thing. I am currently in private practice in Houston, Texas. I have a boutique practice where I see everyone from the ages of 3 on up. And I also provide contract services to the St. Hope Foundation here in Houston, Texas, as well as I'm a staff psychiatrist for an HBCU here in Houston, Texas Southern University.
Wow, that's a full plate. Okay. Dr. Wills, what about you?
So great to be on your show. I am a board certified psychiatrist in adult psychiatry, and I too see patients in the college setting. I'm at USF here in Tampa, Florida, where I reside as the primary caretaker of my father. I am originally from Dayton, Ohio, but have lived in Tampa for about 5.5 years. And in addition to my role at USF, I am also a chief medical officer at a health plan. And so I am passionate about mental health, mental wellness, and resiliency and recovery, and am delighted to be on your show.
Wonderful. So I'm curious, how did you two come together to author this book?
Dr. Barnes, she likes that question.
Great question. So I met Dr. Wills, it's been about 7 years ago now. We were working, I joined actually a health plan where she was already a member, a physician member of the team, and our offices were side by side. And she was really instrumental and helpful in onboarding me. And I spent so much time in her office kind of learning the nuts and the bolts of the new position that we found out that we shared several professional and personal interests. We're both great advocates for mental health and champions of mental health and wellness. And we both love the arts. And so one day after work, we decided that we would join forces and to really increase our kind of professional spheres of knowledge and years of expertise. And we wanted to kind of reach the masses and to really have a platform where we could really have an impact in influencing, dispelling myths and stigma around mental health and mental illness. And so we figured that a book would be a great way to kind of get those healthy conversations started. And we decided to write a book. And so here we are.
Wonderful. And I love that you offer practical guidance to help people understand and navigate mental health issues.
Absolutely. I think in general, we were wanting to kind of demystify the whole notion of mental illness. It's oftentimes in our society, given the huge stigma, brushed under the rug. People don't really talk about it. Families don't really talk about it. And we thought that the best way to stomp out that stigma was to counter that with good, strong information. Both of us spent many years of our lives learning the intricacies of the pathophysiology and the psychopharmacology of mental illness. And we wanted to just break that down in easy to understand, plain language so that people wouldn't have as much fear about it and that they'd feel empowered to do something about it if those symptoms emerge, take charge of it, and move on, just like with any other health condition. So that's where we were coming from.
Right. And then ironically, because of the pandemic, I feel like more people are talking about mental health issues, specifically anxiety and depression. Like, are those the two most common types of mental illness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The most common pre-COVID pandemic, and certainly with the pandemic now, we know that, upwards of 33 to almost nearly half of people in, studies that have been done are reporting increased rates of clinical anxiety and clinical depression. And that's certainly what I'm seeing in my private practice as well.
So as far as mental illness, is that something that most people are born with, like they have a certain gene and then it develops later in their life? Or is it something that kind of develops as they go through different trials, traumas, et cetera, in their lifetime? Are there any studies on that?
There are studies on that. That's an excellent question. And what we know, what the science tells us, is that it's multifactorial. So we do know that certain diseases, mental health issues run in families. So that lets us understand that there is a genetic component to it. And we also know that certain traumas can impact the emergence of psychological symptoms. So we know that there's an environmental component to it too. So it's a beautiful mix of both. And I don't think the science has been 100% worked out. So there's no blood test to say you've got anxiety, you've got diabetes. It's something that you diagnose from a clinical presentation, but we do know that there are biological bases to that. Furthermore, when we do brain imaging, we can see that people's neuroanatomy and functional neuroanatomy has changes when folks have symptoms of anxiety and or depression. What we don't know is whether those changes in functional MRI are causal or effect, but we do know that there is a biological basis to behavior.
That's interesting. And I also read that somewhere that there's over 200 classified forms of mental illness. Is that true?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I know the number offhand. This is
I mean, that
Dr.
seems like
Barnes,
a lot. Okay.
yes, it's certainly. And if you look at like the manual that we use in our profession, the diagnostic and statistical manual, it's not a, it's there are numerous pages. And so if you break it down like that, then there are certainly, you can go from like the substance abuse or substance use disorders, so nicotine or alcohol. And then you have, several types of anxiety, clinical anxiety disorders. You have several types of mood disorders, which major depression is one. And so if you get to kind of the nuts and bolts, nitty gritty of how, different illnesses are classified, I guess, it would be quite a large number. However, the more common things are common that we spoke of, like clinical anxiety and clinical depression. And then there are some things that we see much less often.
Right. I know chapter 13 in your book, you talk about women's mental health. And I believe you stated that half of the people in this country will experience some sort of mental health disorder in their lifetime, but those conditions affect women a lot more than men. Do we have a percentage for that? Like how much higher it is for women than men?
So that's an interesting statistic. What we know about that statistic is that more women than men show up for treatment.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we're not 100%. So women tend to be more help seeking. Men may externalize their feelings or internalize their feelings or cover their feelings with other things. And so we don't necessarily know that, but we do know that twice as many women present with depression than men. Although there's evidence to suggest that it exists in an equal state between the two sexes, and so that's the clarifications that we always like to make around the presentation of illness.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And just speaking of women and just moms specifically, I mean, I know there's a lot of mothers out there who feel overstretched and overwhelmed, and they might be suffering from some sort of mental illness, but maybe they don't know what to do. Like they feel so overwhelmed, they don't know who to turn to. Like if there's a mom out there listening, like is there a first course of action they should take? Like if they feel themselves in that position that possibly there could be some sort of mental illness happening, like what should their strategy be first, I guess? And I know that's a very broad question, but I know practicality is something that you both focus on. So maybe there's some practical steps maybe they can take to getting help for whatever's happening in their world.
Sure. I'd have you take that one, Carl. Dr. Martin, is that okay?
That's great. Go ahead, Dr. Wills.
I love how you both tag team. It's you're so cohesive.
We've been working together for a long time now. So, that's an excellent question. So what we like to emphasize for moms is that they first and foremost check in with themselves and say to themselves, how am I feeling? What is my mood like? Have I been sleeping okay? Have I been eating okay? Have I been down? Have I been tearful at the drop of a hat? Have I been irritable at the drop of a hat? Have I been overwhelmed by everything and feel like I'm losing control? Have I had a panic attack? Have I been functioning? Have I been oversleeping? Have I been undersleeping? And that's one of the first things that we like to teach is how to do a self-assessment, because so many times people are just running, taking care of everything that they don't even know if they're feeling exhausted or not. And so we really like to start with people checking in on themselves, on their own emotional health. And then if you start thinking, you know what, something might not be right with me. I'm really not handling things as well as I normally do. I'm really sad. I'm really apathetic. I'm really withdrawn, that sort of thing. We encourage people to first start out with self-care. Self-care is the first strategy for managing through any emotional or psychological situation. So what I mean by self-care is a good, healthy regimen of exercise that creates endorphins, which helps exercise pick up our mood. I mean, eating nutritiously, drinking water, meditating, practicing mindfulness, those kind of things to make sure that you're getting adequate amounts of sleep. That's so critical, making sure that you're getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night. And I know that can be hard when you've got toddlers especially, but definitely trying to get that sleep. Now, if you put all those things in place and are maniacal about your self-care regimen and still you're having symptoms, that might be the time that you want to reach out to a therapist and seek professional help. And you can access therapy in many ways. Sometimes people can go and talk to someone at their church, their clergy, and that can be sometimes a good way to access services. Sometimes folks can call their employee assistance program and have somebody to talk about if they're stressed out about a divorce or money or something like that, a precipitant, but they're just not able to kind of get over it. So EAP. Sometimes on the back of your insurance card, your private insurance card, if you've got insurance, blessed enough to have insurance, then you can call your insurance card, and they usually have a behavioral health hotline. And then if you don't have insurance, community mental health centers provide psychiatric and psychological services for people who need to talk to someone. And then there's always our frontline organizations that we love so much, community service organizations. Those are also first places to go if people are having problems figuring out how to do it. There are also a lot of great new online technologies. There are apps and things for mood that people are using now. So you can also get an online therapist. And for people who are in Gen X and Gen Y who are comfortable with texting, they've got texting and chat modalities. They've got televisits. So there's lots of different modalities and ways to access services if talking to someone is what you need. Now, if it gets a little heavier than that, and so, if talk therapy isn't going to be enough, then you may need to see either, the other person is your primary care physician, going to your primary care physician, your regular family doc, and telling them, Doc, I'm stressed out. Can you help me find a therapist? But if you're having more trouble than that and more difficulty than that, you may end up getting referred to a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Generally speaking, most disorders that people have, which is the anxiety and depression that we've been focused on, can be treated by your primary care physician. Generally, the more serious disorders where you would need to see a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So most people can get services through their primary care doctor, and they're very straightforward, easy medications that work, and that can really help calm anxiety that's gotten disproportionate and lift that mood up. People have been down for too long, and too long, in the words of a mental health therapist and a psychologist, is 2 weeks. If it's been over 2 weeks and you've had a persistently low mood and you can't get out of it, and it's worse than a funk, and there's no real true outside precipitant, that's the time when you need to kind of say, hey, wait a minute. I need to kind of think about whether or not. And one thing for sure, if you're starting to have feelings of giving up, starting to have feelings of losing hope, starting to have feelings that it's not worth it at all, you absolutely need to get help at that point.
Wow, that's excellent. That's very thorough. Thank you so much. You answered like 5 to 10 of my next questions. That was good. Dr. Barnes, did you want to add anything to that?
Those were excellent, comprehensive points by Dr. Wills. I'll only add that it's imperative that moms take care of themselves regarding their mental health and wellness, because we know that studies show us that moms that kind of continue on in this cycle of not taking care of themselves, and they have, children at home that they're taking care of, we know that studies show that mothers who are depressed are more likely to have boys who are oppositional and defiant. And what does that look like in the school setting? Fighting, getting expelled, getting suspended, talking back, not following rules. And so it's really important that moms take the time to take care of themselves. And that's not, that we talked about stigma a little bit earlier, but that's not being weak or, clinical depression and clinical psychiatric conditions aren't personal shortcomings, but they really are biological, oftentimes, conditions that can be very well treated, but you have to present for help. And what I tell my parents and my mothers that are in my practice is, what are you teaching your kids by not taking care of yourself? Because they're learning by example. And so we want our kids as parents to grow up to be healthy, productive members of society. But if you've never seen your mom take the time out to, attend to all those self-care needs that Dr. Wills spoke about, or to go get help and seek therapy and or, a medication intervention, if that's what it calls for, is to really be neglectful. And we don't want to model that for our kids.
That's excellent. So That's interesting that you mentioned that if moms don't take care of themselves, then it can lead our boys to develop oppositional defiance behavior. Now, is that another form of mental illness, like in that adolescent?
Well, it's a psychiatric condition, but there's no evidence thus far that it's a brain-based illness. We consider it more of a disruptive behavior, and it can start as early as childhood and proceed on into adolescence. But it's primarily, what I like to kind of describe it to as my parents, that if you're very depressed and withdrawn and not emotionally available as a parent, or oftentimes a primary parent that's the caregiver, then your child, particularly your male, who boys tend to kind of act out, whereas girls tend to act in. And so if you're not emotionally available, they're needing that, emotional attention. And so if they can't get the praise, the affirmation, the recognition just by being, they're going to get it because they need to be scolded, or you need to reprimand them because of some negative behavior. And so that's kind of the dynamic that's being set up. And so you really want to be a present parent. You want to be emotionally available. You want to be able to praise and recognize the successes so that your child knows that they're able to get recognition from you and emotional availability by being and particularly being good.
Oh, that makes sense. That's excellent. And then let's say there's some mothers out there, maybe the spouse realizes, oh, there's something going on with this mom, or maybe a mom friend notices, oh, there's something happening with my friend. Like, what should their course of action be if they notice a loved one could be suffering from a mental illness and they need help? Like, what are some practical steps, as a friend or a loved one that they can take to help that person?
So the first thing first is to make sure that you approach that person with empathy and love and compassion. So it's in large part about the stance. Many times people are confused when someone is depressed, when they're withdrawn, when they're not functioning. And so it can sometimes cause people to react like, you're not doing the laundry, you're not cooking anymore, the house isn't clean. And so, but it's more kind of like a gentle, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been your best self for a while. And as your spouse and as your loved one, I'm concerned. And, I went on ahead and made an appointment with your primary care physician so that we could kind of talk about some of these issues, bring them in on it, and let them know what's going on. And I'm sure we can get some help. It's not, I think you're depressed. It's not, why don't you just get up and get outside? All you need to do is just buck up, because I'm going to tell you something, that all you need to do is buck up attitude. It's what's intuitive, because it's what you think that person needs to hear. But oftentimes, if they could buck up, they would. And that is, in fact, what the disorder is that they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to understand. Because people's first intuition is, well, just go outside and take a walk. Well, they don't want to. They can't get out of bed. They're not eating. They're not doing things that they normally do. And so it's that empathy, that compassion, that recognition that they're not being their best selves and that you're concerned. And the other thing is, people don't know how to talk about it, so they get scared. The best thing to do is just confront it. And that's why we've been so passionate about how to have these conversations. Great question. And coming around and giving people the tools and the information so that they feel empowered to have these conversations and help people get the help that they need.
Right. Excellent. Dr. Barnes, anything else to add to that?
I think I would only add is just to, for the loved one, the spouse, the friend, to ask, how can I help? How can I help? It's a very short question, but a lot of times, like Dr. Wills mentioned, we want to go in and blame or say what you aren't doing, but to ask the person, hey, I noticed that you haven't been to as many gym classes, or you're, missing work more often. How can I help you? And to kind of meet the person where they are.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. So I know you both are strong advocates about breaking the stigma behind mental illness. Are there any practical ways that people can start breaking the stigma? Let's say someone has been diagnosed with a mental illness. Like, how do they break the stigma just with themselves? Like, do they talk about it, like, and share that information with their loved ones? Like, what are some practical ways that we can start breaking down that stigma? Let's say someone is diagnosed with a mental illness.
It's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, people have a right to keep their own medical information to themselves. So I don't think, it's forced upon them to just walk around telling everybody, hey, I've got depression, hey, I've got
Yeah,
bipolar,
that's true.
hey, I've got. So just like, we don't do that. But if it comes up and it's a safe space, and if it's the right time, and if they're feeling good about themselves, then that's a time where people can share and disclose. I think the other thing is if they see someone else struggling, and they want to disclose and share in that moment, hey, I see you struggling. I've struggled in this way in the past. I've got a number of a great therapist. I've gotten on meds before, and that's a way to kind of decrease the shame. And then I know even families sometimes when they have a loved one who, let's say, has bipolar or schizophrenia, they do things, they don't want to disclose their family members' business per se, but they can do things like join organizations like the National Alliance for Mental Illness and do fundraising, or devote their time to helping young people with self-esteem and that sort of thing, and just having more of a language and a tolerance for accepting that people may have issues of the mind, and giving space for that. Dr. Barnes, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Those are great points. I think I would only add is to be an ally. I mean, a lot of times we, as individuals that are busy and have, full plates, we only are concerned about what's a concern to us. And as we mentioned, mental health and mental illness is something that touches all of us. It's not one of us that can't say that we have a family member, a friend, a loved one, a coworker, whether we know it or not, that is, may have had a mental health condition or episode at some point. And so even if it doesn't affect you, as Dr. Wills mentioned, join an organization. I know a company that I used to work for every May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, would have a 5K walk, or you can, use your times, treasures, and talents toward to further a mental health cause. To increase awareness. And then lastly, I would just add to really watch your language. We talk about this in our book, but, saying, oh, that person's psycho, or that person's bipolar, or that's crazy. We really have to be sensitive to the language that we use around, mental health terms, conditions, because they can be very negative and they can perpetuate the stigma that's out there about mental health conditions, which are oftentimes, as we said, brain-based illnesses, just as illnesses that affect the heart, that affect the pancreas, diabetes, and so forth. And so we really want to be more careful about the language that we use.
Right. And then lastly, can you both just share like the best ways that people can keep their mental health in good condition?
This is Dr. Barnes. I'm a recent, and Dr. Wills knows this, I say recent, in the last year and a half, became a huge fan of meditation and mindfulness. I mean, I think that it's a great way to decrease anxiety, to improve sleep, to improve or increase creativity. And so meditation and mindfulness, and there are a few apps that are out there now if you're a novice to meditation, like I was, like Headspace, and I think a lot of people use Calm for kind of guided meditation, but that is really great. And to practice it, a lot of things we're talking about, people kind of know and do anyway, but to really be intentional and consistent, and that's where you will see the payoff. And then I'll also add, just take time to have fun. And, adult women and adult men, we all have little boys and little girls inside of us, our inner children. So I think as a busy adults, especially going through a pandemic, that there's so much serious, there's so much, tasks we have to check off, but have a little fun every day, whether that's dancing or listening to music or working out or watching a good, movie or Netflix series. But we need to have time to have fun.
Right. Dr. Wills?
All of those things that Dr. Barnes said are so important. I'd only add a few other things. I got to say, she knows that I'm a huge fan of meditation too. I mean, I was going to say first things are meditation. But I do recognize that meditation is not for everyone. And so that idea of flow is important, and how one finds their flow. And that really helps with being proactive about their mental illness. Some people it's painting, some people it's dancing. Great ways to get access to that flow is through gardening. People have really, gotten into gardening and seeing the earth and being one with nature and going out on trails and hiking and seeing trees and appreciating the beauty. So really being intentional and thoughtful about those things. We talked about physical health, making sure that you're eating nutritiously, getting that exercise. Exercise is critical. If there's two things that people can do to prevent their mental health issues, it is exercise, it is meditation, or flow if meditation is not your thing. Yoga is another way that you can get that kind of just creativity, lessen your anxiety, those sorts of things. So we really do believe in both prevention, and also just being proactive about your emotional health and thinking about it. That's the other thing. So many people just go on autopilot. We just go. We just go. We don't stop and really think about, how to take care of ourselves. We don't teach each other that. And that's one of the other things. I mean, I love, Dr. Barnes is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, but start teaching your kids. We were talking about moms earlier. Start teaching your kids how to be thoughtful about their mental health and their mental and emotional wellness too. And a lot of that social and emotional learning is starting to happen in schools, because we're realizing that some people find out the tips and tricks along the way, but there's no reason why we shouldn't be teaching it to one another too. And so I'm appreciative of a platform like yours to be able to have some of these rich conversations about it.
Yeah, and thank you both for such invaluable information. Now, where can people find you if they want to know more about you?
Dr. Wills, you want to take that?
Sure. You can find us on www.healthymindmds.com.
Thanks so much for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time.